Most people become invisible gradually, one ignored interaction at a time. Sophia Reyes had perfected the art by age 24. She moved through Romano's Italian restaurant like a ghost in a stained apron, refilling water glasses and clearing plates while customers looked right through her. The diner's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows under her dark eyes, and the perpetual smell of garlic and basil had seeped so deep into her uniform that she couldn't wash it out anymore. 3 days, that's how long she had before her landlord would start the eviction process. Sophia counted the crumpled bills in her apron pocket for the 4th time today. $67.32. Rent was $850. Her mother's medication was another $200, and that prescription couldn't wait. The rain had started an hour ago, drumming against the restaurant's windows with the persistence of a debt collector. Sophia wiped down table 12 with methodical precision, her hands steady, despite the knot of anxiety twisting in her stomach. The checkered tablecloth was worn thin from years of use, but Marco insisted on keeping the authentic Italian atmosphere his grandfather had established in 1962. "Sophia!" Marco's voice cut through the dinner rush noise. "Table 6 needs their check." She nodded without looking up. Table 6 was the businessman who'd spent the entire meal on his phone, talking loudly about quarterly projections while his pasta grew cold. He hadn't acknowledged her existence once during service, treating her like furniture that occasionally brought food. Sophia approached his table with the practiced invisibility she'd cultivated. "Your check, sir." He grabbed the leather folder without glancing at her, still shouting into his phone about market volatility. His fingers were heavy with gold rings that probably cost more than she made in a month. When he finally hung up, he looked at the bill with obvious irritation. "This is wrong," he snapped. "I ordered the linguine, not the fettuccine." Sophia had written down his order carefully. Fettuccine Alfredo. She'd even repeated it back to him, but arguing with customers was a luxury she couldn't afford, not when Marco was already looking for reasons to cut hours. "I apologise for the confusion, sir. Would you like me to have the kitchen prepare the linguine?" "Forget it. Just take off the fettuccine charge, and next time learn to listen." Her jaw clenched, but Sophia nodded. "Of course, sir." As she walked back to the register, she caught a fragment of conversation from the kitchen. Giuseppe, the ancient line cook, was muttering in rapid Italian while he stirred a pot of marinara sauce. His pronunciation was wrong. The word for basil came out mangled, the vowels flattened and harsh. "Basilico," Sophia whispered under her breath, correcting him automatically. "Basilico." It was a habit left over from her childhood, when Nonna Benedetta would grip her hand with surprising strength and make her repeat Sicilian words until the melody of them was perfect. "La lingua è il cuore della famiglia," her grandmother used to say. Language is the heart of the family. But Nonna was gone now, buried in St. Mary's Cemetery, with a headstone Sophia was still paying off in monthly instalments, and Sophia's language skills earned her exactly nothing in this world where she served overpriced pasta to people who wouldn't remember her face 5 minutes after leaving. The businessman left without a tip. Sophia cleared his table mechanically, stacking plates with the efficiency of someone who'd done this thousands of times. The restaurant was quieter now, just the soft clink of silverware and the murmur of conversations winding down. Outside, the rain had intensified, turning the streetlights into blurred halos of yellow light. She was wiping down the same table for the 2nd time when Marco appeared at her elbow, counting the night's receipts with practiced speed. "We're down 12% from last week," he said, not looking at her. "Corporate's breathing down my neck about labour costs." Sophia's stomach dropped. "Marco, I can work extra shifts. I don't mind staying late." "It's not about the hours, kid. It's about the numbers." He finally met her eyes, and she saw genuine regret there. "I might have to cut someone loose. You know how it is." She knew exactly how it was. Last hired, first fired. Sophia had only been at Romano's for 8 months, ever since the diner where she'd worked for 2 years suddenly closed when the owner had a heart attack. She was always the expendable one, the girl without connections or leverage. "I understand," she said quietly. Marco patted her shoulder awkwardly. "Look, you're a good worker, reliable, but reliable doesn't pay the bills when the till comes up short." After he walked away, Sophia stood alone in the dining room, surrounded by empty tables and the lingering ghosts of conversations. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in harsh, unforgiving clarity. She thought about her mother, alone in their cramped apartment, probably asleep in the chair again because the bed hurt her back too much. She thought about the pills that kept her mother's heart beating regularly, and what would happen when they ran out. Sophia had always been good at being invisible. It was safer that way, drawing no attention, making no waves, surviving rather than living. But invisibility had a cost. When no one sees you, no one helps you either. She finished her closing duties in silence, stacking chairs and mopping floors while the rain continued its relentless assault on the windows. By the time she locked up, the street was empty except for the occasional car cutting through puddles that reflected the neon signs like broken promises. Sophia pulled her thin jacket tighter and started the 6-block walk to the bus stop. The rain soaked through her shoes almost immediately, but she didn't hurry. There was nowhere urgent to go, no one waiting who would worry if she was late. Just another invisible girl walking through an indifferent city, counting the hours until she had to disappear into someone else's world again. The bus shelter offered little protection from the storm, but Sophia huddled in its corner anyway, watching headlights blur past in the darkness. Tomorrow she would serve more pasta to more people who wouldn't see her. She would smile and nod and apologize for confusion that wasn't her fault. She would count tips that weren't enough and pray that Marco's corporate overlords would find their profit margins in someone else's paycheck. But tonight, as thunder rolled across the city like an approaching army, Sophia allowed herself one moment of bitter honesty. She was tired of being invisible. She was tired of surviving. Somewhere deep inside, a part of her that still remembered her grandmother's fierce pride whispered that she was meant for something more than this. The bus arrived 20 minutes late, its brakes hissing like an angry cat. Sophia climbed aboard, fed quarters into the fare box, and found an empty seat near the back. Outside, the city continued its nightly ritual of rain and neon and lonely people hurrying nowhere in particular. Sophia closed her eyes and let the bus carry her home through the storm, not knowing that tomorrow would bring a chance encounter that would change everything, not knowing that her carefully cultivated invisibility was about to shatter like glass, and that the language sleeping in her heart would finally wake up and save her life. 1 week later, Sophia had settled into a routine that felt both foreign and familiar. Giuseppe's suite occupied the entire east wing of Vincent's estate, with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the lemon grove and a sitting room where they spent mornings reading Sicilian poetry together. Sophia had her own adjoining room, elegantly furnished but not ostentatious, with a view of the rose gardens and direct access to Giuseppe's quarters for emergencies. The transformation in Giuseppe had been remarkable. With Sophia's constant companionship and cultural connection, his confused episodes had become less frequent, shorter in duration, more manageable. He still had bad days when his memory failed him completely, but the good days were becoming more common. Days when he remembered Vincent's childhood stories, when he could follow conversations without getting lost, when he smiled more than he worried. Vincent watched this transformation with something approaching awe. His father was eating regularly, sleeping through the night, taking his medications without protest. The improvement was so dramatic that Vincent had started joining them for breakfast, then lunch, then finding excuses to work from the home office so he could observe the miracle Sophia had created. "Giuseppe wants to visit St. Patrick's Cathedral," Sophia told Vincent over morning coffee. "He's been talking about going to confession for 3 days. Vincent looked up from his laptop with automatic concern. "That's not a good idea. Too public, too many variables we can't control." "He's not a prisoner, Vincent. He needs spiritual connection, especially when his memory gets confused. The familiar rituals help ground him." "My father's spiritual needs don't outweigh his physical safety." Sophia set down her coffee cup with more force than necessary. His dignity is part of his safety. When you take away everything that makes him feel human, you're not protecting him, you're just keeping him alive. The argument had been brewing for days. Vincent's security protocols were comprehensive and effective, but they were also suffocating. Giuseppe couldn't walk in his own garden without bodyguards shadowing his steps. He couldn't receive visitors without background checks and prior approval. He couldn't even order takeout without the restaurant being vetted for potential security risks. "You don't understand the nature of the threats we're dealing with," Vincent said, his voice carrying the edge that made grown men reconsider their life choices. "I understand that your father is disappearing a little more each day, and it's not just the dementia doing it. It's the isolation, the fear, the way you've turned his world into a beautiful prison." Vincent's expression went very still. A beautiful prison that keeps him breathing. Breathing isn't the same as living. Giuseppe appeared in the kitchen doorway at that moment, dressed in his best suit and carrying his worn leather prayer book. His eyes were clear and focused, and he was humming a hymn under his breath. "Are we going to church today?" he asked Sophia in Sicilian. "I dreamed about Maria last night. She said I should light a candle for her, ask Father Benedetto to say a mass." Sophia looked at Vincent, seeing the conflict in his expression. Giuseppe was having one of his clear days, present and purposeful in a way that had become precious and rare. To deny him this spiritual comfort would be cruel, but Vincent's world had taught him that cruelty was sometimes the price of survival. "Papa," Vincent said gently, "maybe we could arrange for Father Benedetto to come here instead, have a private service in the garden." Giuseppe's face fell with disappointment. "It's not the same, Vincent. I need to be in God's house, with other people who remember Maria, who knew our family. I need to feel connected to something bigger than these walls." Sophia made a decision that would change everything. "I'll take him. This afternoon, when the cathedral is quieter, we'll light the candle, say the prayers and come home." Vincent's reaction was immediate and sharp. "Absolutely not." "Why not? I'll be with him every moment. We'll take one of your cars, stay for 30 minutes, come straight back." "Because you're not equipped to handle the kind of threats that—" "What threats?" "Vincent," Sophia's voice carried new steel. "Specific threats, not generalized paranoia about what might happen. What actual intelligence do you have that Giuseppe is in immediate danger at St. Patrick's Cathedral on a Tuesday afternoon?" Vincent was quiet for a moment, forced to acknowledge that his security concerns were based more on possibility than probability. The Castellanos had been quiet since their surveillance team had been discouraged. No new threats, no escalating pressure, no indication that they were planning anything beyond psychological warfare. But in Vincent's experience, quiet enemies were often the most dangerous. "I don't like it," he said finally. "You don't have to like it, but Giuseppe deserves to make his own choices about the risks he's willing to take." Giuseppe had been listening to this exchange with growing understanding. "Vincent, my son, I know you worry, but I'm an old man with a failing mind who has already lived longer than I expected. If God calls me home from his house, that would not be the worst way to go." The words hit Vincent like physical blows. His father was accepting mortality with the grace that came from deep faith and longer perspective. But Vincent wasn't ready to let go, wasn't prepared to risk losing the only family he had left. 2 hours, Vincent said finally, and you take Marco and Tony with you. They stay in the car, but they're there if you need them. Sophia nodded, understanding that this was the compromise Vincent could live with. 2 hours, light the candle, say the prayers, come home safe. Giuseppe clapped his hands together with joy. "Grazie, Vincent. Maria will be so pleased that I remembered her properly." 3 hours later, Sophia and Giuseppe were sitting in the third pew of St. Patrick's Cathedral, surrounded by the familiar comfort of incense and stained glass and centuries of accumulated prayers. Giuseppe had lit his candle for Maria, spoken with Father Benedetto about arranging a memorial mass, and confessed sins that existed only in the tangled pathways of his memory. Sophia had prayed for guidance, for wisdom, for the strength to help Giuseppe maintain his dignity while keeping him safe. She had also prayed for Vincent, who carried the weight of protecting everyone he loved with the kind of intensity that would eventually break a lesser man. They were preparing to leave when Giuseppe insisted on visiting the side chapel dedicated to Saint Joseph. "My patron saint," he explained to Sophia. "I always ask his intercession for Vincent's protection." The chapel was small and dimly lit, with a statue of Saint Joseph holding the Christ child. Giuseppe knelt before the altar with the practiced grace of a lifetime Catholic, his prayers whispered in Latin that he had learned as a boy. Sophia remained standing, watching the main cathedral for any signs of trouble. Marco and Tony were visible through the side windows, positioned strategically near their car. The afternoon crowd was sparse, mostly elderly parishioners and a few tourists taking photographs. Everything seemed peaceful. Safe. That was when Sophia noticed the two men in dark coats approaching the chapel entrance. They moved with purpose, their attention fixed on Giuseppe's kneeling figure. One was speaking into a phone, while the other reached inside his coat with the practiced motion of someone accessing a concealed weapon. Sophia's blood turned to ice. These weren't random parishioners. They were professionals, and they had found their target. Time slowed to a crystalline clarity that Sophia had never experienced before. She could see Giuseppe's vulnerable position, the men's positioning to block the chapel exit, the distance to the main cathedral where help might be available. She could see that Giuseppe was about to die and that Vincent would never recover from losing him. Sophia didn't think. She acted. She threw herself between Giuseppe and the approaching men, her voice carrying across the chapel with surprising authority. "Nonno Giuseppe," she said in rapid Sicilian, "we need to leave. Now. Maria is calling you home." Giuseppe looked up with confusion, but he trusted Sophia's urgency. He struggled to his feet, moving slower than Sophia needed him to. The first man reached the chapel entrance just as Sophia helped Giuseppe stand. He was young, nervous, probably new to this kind of work. When he saw Sophia looking directly at him, his hand froze inside his coat. "Excuse me," Sophia said in English, her voice carrying the authority of someone who belonged in this sacred space. "My grandfather needs assistance getting to the main altar. Could you please give us some privacy?" The second man appeared behind the first, older and more experienced. He assessed the situation with cold eyes, calculating whether Sophia represented a threat or simply an inconvenience. "We're not here for the girl," he said quietly, "just the old man." Sophia felt something fundamental shift inside her chest, a door opening onto a part of herself she had never known existed. She stepped closer to Giuseppe, placing herself directly between him and the men who wanted to hurt him. "You're not here for anyone," she said, her voice steady despite the terror racing through her veins. "This is God's house. Take your business somewhere else." The younger man's hand moved closer to his weapon. "Lady, you don't want to be involved in this." "I'm already involved, and you have about 30 seconds before my security detail realizes something is wrong." It was a bluff, but Sophia delivered it with the kind of confidence that made smart men reconsider their options. She had learned from watching Vincent that authority was often more powerful than actual power. The older man studied her face, trying to determine if she was connected to Vincent's organization or simply an unfortunate witness. "You're the girl who speaks Italian to the old man." "I'm the girl who's going to walk him out of this church, and you're going to let us leave because killing people in front of a crucifix is the kind of sin that follows you into hell." Giuseppe was watching this exchange with growing alarm. He might not understand English perfectly, but he could read body language and recognize the predatory tension in the air. "Sophia," he whispered in Sicilian, "these are bad men." "Yes, Nonno, but we're leaving now." Sophia took Giuseppe's arm and started walking toward the main cathedral, moving slowly enough not to trigger any aggressive response from the men behind them. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, but her hands remained steady as she guided Giuseppe away from immediate danger. They made it exactly 12 steps before the younger man lost his nerve and drew his weapon. The sound of metal against leather echoed through the chapel like a gunshot. Giuseppe cried out in terror. Sophia felt the world narrow to a single point of absolute clarity. She was going to save Giuseppe Torino, or she was going to die trying. And for the first time in her life, Sophia Reyes was ready to fight. The gunshot that echoed through St. Patrick's Cathedral wasn't the one Sophia expected. She had thrown herself toward the younger gunman, moving on pure instinct and desperate courage, when Vincent's voice cut through the chapel like a blade. "Drop the weapon, or I drop you where you stand." Vincent emerged from the shadows near the altar, his own gun trained on the older assassin with the steady precision of someone who had never missed a shot that mattered. Behind him, Marco and Tony flanked the chapel's side entrances, cutting off any escape routes. The younger gunman's hands were shaking as he kept his weapon pointed at Giuseppe, but his eyes darted between Vincent's position and his partner's increasingly desperate expression. They had walked into a trap that neither had seen coming. "This is a house of God," Vincent said, his voice carrying the kind of quiet menace that made smart people pray for salvation. "You have exactly 5 seconds to decide whether you want to meet him today." Sophia remained crouched protectively over Giuseppe, who was trembling but alert. The old man's eyes were completely clear, focused with the intensity of someone who understood exactly how close death had come. "Vincent," Giuseppe whispered in Sicilian, "the girl saved my life." The older assassin made the calculation that would save his partner's life. He slowly raised his hands, signalling surrender. "We're done here. No harm meant to anyone." "No harm meant?" Vincent's laugh was sharp enough to cut glass. "You brought weapons into a cathedral to threaten my father. The only reason you're breathing is that I don't want to spill blood in front of the crucifix." Sophia helped Giuseppe to his feet, her hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. She had acted without thinking, moved without hesitation, put herself between Giuseppe and death, with the kind of instinctive courage that couldn't be taught or faked. Vincent had been watching from the moment they entered the chapel, had seen Sophia's immediate recognition of the threat, had witnessed her split-second decision to protect Giuseppe regardless of the personal cost. She was magnificent. "Sophia," Vincent said without taking his eyes off the disarmed assassins, "take Giuseppe to the main cathedral. Wait by the altar until I finish here." Sophia nodded, understanding that Vincent's version of finishing business wasn't something Giuseppe needed to witness. She guided the old man out of the chapel, her arm around his shoulders, as much for her comfort as his. "You were very brave, Piccola," Giuseppe told her as they walked toward the altar. "Very stupid, but very brave." Sophia's laugh was shaky with leftover fear and adrenaline. "Nonna always said that courage was just stupidity with better intentions. Your Nonna was a wise woman, and Vincent—" Giuseppe smiled with grandfatherly pride. "Vincent saw you protect his familia. In our world, that means everything." They knelt together in the front pew, Giuseppe praying in Latin while Sophia tried to process what had just happened. She had been prepared to fight armed men with nothing but determination and desperation. She had been willing to die rather than watch Giuseppe be hurt. The realization was both terrifying and liberating. She had found something worth protecting, something that mattered more than her own safety. 20 minutes later, Vincent emerged from the chapel alone. His associates had already removed the would-be assassins through a side entrance, handling the situation with the kind of efficiency that suggested extensive experience in crisis management. "Are you hurt?" Vincent asked Sophia, his hands moving over her arms and shoulders with surprising gentleness, checking for injuries. "I'm fine. Giuseppe is fine. We're both fine." Vincent's eyes searched her face, looking for signs of shock or trauma. What he found instead was a kind of fierce satisfaction, as if Sophia had discovered something important about herself during those terrifying moments. You threw yourself between my father and armed men, Vincent said quietly. Yes, without thinking about the consequences. There wasn't time to think, there was only time to act. Vincent was quiet for a long moment, studying Sophia's expression with the intensity of someone trying to solve a complex equation. She had proven herself under the ultimate test, had demonstrated the kind of loyalty that his world valued above everything else. More than that, she had shown the kind of courage that couldn't be bought, trained, or faked. When death came calling, Sophia Reyes had stepped forward rather than backward. "We need to leave," Vincent said finally. "There will be questions, investigations, complications that are better avoided." The ride home was silent except for Giuseppe's occasional prayers of gratitude and Sophia's quiet reassurances. Vincent drove with the controlled precision of someone processing multiple layers of threat assessment and emotional response. Sophia had just saved his father's life. More than that, she had been willing to sacrifice her own life to do it. The debt Vincent owed her was beyond calculation, beyond repayment, but it was more complicated than gratitude. Watching Sophia move with protective instincts toward Giuseppe, seeing her face the threat with steady courage, Vincent had felt something shift in his chest that had nothing to do with obligation and everything to do with recognition. This was the woman he had been waiting for, without knowing he was waiting. Someone who understood that family was worth dying for, that loyalty was more valuable than safety, that some things mattered more than survival. Back at the estate, Giuseppe was exhausted, but exhilarated by the day's events. Sophia helped him to his room, made sure he took his evening medications, and sat with him until he fell asleep clutching his prayer book. She found Vincent in his study, staring out the window at the lemon grove, where security lights cast long shadows between the trees. "How did you know?" Sophia asked. How did you know to be there?" Vincent turned to face her, his expression unguarded in a way she had never seen before. "I followed you. I couldn't stand the idea of you and Giuseppe being vulnerable, so I positioned my team around the cathedral before you even arrived." "You don't trust anyone." "I didn't, until today." Vincent moved closer, his eyes intense with something that might have been wonder. "Sophia, what you did, most people would have run, would have protected themselves first. Giuseppe is family. You don't abandon family." The simple statement hung between them, loaded with implications that neither was quite ready to acknowledge. Sophia had demonstrated the kind of loyalty that Vincent's world demanded, but she had done it from love rather than obligation. "You were magnificent," Vincent said quietly, "terrifying and magnificent." Sophia felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I was scared out of my mind." "Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite the fear." Vincent reached out and touched her face with surprising gentleness. "You saved my father's life today. You saved mine too." "Vincent? No, listen to me. Giuseppe is everything good that's left in my world. Without him, I become something darker, something that can't find its way back to anything resembling human. You gave him back to me today." Sophia stepped closer, drawn by the vulnerability in Vincent's voice. This was the man beneath the reputation, the son who loved his father more than his own life. "You would have done the same thing," Sophia said. "I would have killed them all and lived with the consequences. You found a way to protect Giuseppe without destroying your own soul in the process. That's—" Vincent struggled for words. "That's a kind of strength I don't possess." The space between them seemed charged with electricity, with recognition and possibility, and the dangerous arithmetic of two people who had found something unexpected in each other. "Sophia," Vincent said, his voice rough with honesty, "I think I'm falling in love with you. And in my world, that makes you the most valuable and most vulnerable person on earth." Sophia looked into his eyes and saw everything she had been searching for, without knowing she was searching. Purpose, protection, a place where she mattered not just for what she could do, but for who she was. "Then we'll have to make sure I'm strong enough to handle both," Sophia said. When Vincent kissed her, it was with the desperate intensity of a man who had found something worth living for in a world that specialized in taking away everything that mattered. And when Sophia kissed him back, it was with the fierce certainty of a woman who had finally found her home. Outside, Giuseppe's lemon trees swayed in the evening breeze, their fruit growing sweeter with each passing day. And inside Vincent Torino's fortress of a house, two people who had been invisible to each other just days before discovered that sometimes the most powerful weapon in a dangerous world was simply the courage to love without conditions. The waitress was gone forever. In her place stood the queen of an empire built on loyalty, protection, and the unshakable belief that some things were worth fighting for. Sophia had finally found her kingdom. 6 months later, Sophia stood in the same doorway where her transformation had begun, but everything else had changed beyond recognition. Romano's restaurant looked smaller than she remembered, the checkered tablecloths more worn, the fluorescent lights harsher against the autumn evening. But what struck her most was how different she felt walking through that familiar space. The invisible waitress who had once moved like a ghost between these tables was gone, replaced by someone who commanded attention simply by existing. Sophia wore a tailored coat that cost more than she used to make in 3 months, her dark hair styled with the kind of professional elegance that money could buy, but confidence had to earn. When she moved, it was with the assured grace of someone who had learned that being seen was a power, not a vulnerability. Giuseppe walked beside her, his arm linked through hers with the comfortable familiarity of family. The old man's improvement over the past months had been remarkable. With Sophia's constant companionship and cultural connection, his confused episodes had become rare, brief, manageable. He still had difficult days when his memory failed him, but the good days far outnumbered the bad ones now. "It smells the same," Giuseppe said in English that had improved dramatically since Sophia had started teaching him. "Garlic and hope and dreams that cost too much." Sophia laughed, a sound rich with affection and hard-won wisdom. "Nonna used to say that restaurants were just kitchens with bigger hearts." Vincent followed them inside, his presence still commanding but somehow softer than it had been 6 months ago. Living with Sophia and Giuseppe had taught him that strength didn't always have to be sharp, that protection could be gentle, that love was the most powerful weapon in any arsenal. He wore his power differently now, with the quiet confidence of a man who no longer had to prove anything to anyone. The Castellanos family had been permanently discouraged from future business ventures after their failed cathedral operation. Other potential threats had received the message loud and clear. Vincent Torino's family was off limits, protected by something more dangerous than mere violence. They were protected by love that had been tested under fire and found unbreakable. Marco appeared from behind the bar, his face cycling through surprise, nervousness, and genuine pleasure at seeing Sophia again. "Sophia, look at you, you look—" He gestured helplessly, trying to find words for the transformation. "Like someone who finally found where she belongs," Sophia said simply. The dinner was Giuseppe's idea, a return to the place where their story had begun. He wanted to show Sophia off to the people who had known her when she was invisible, wanted to demonstrate that miracles could happen to anyone brave enough to reach for them. They were seated at the same table where Giuseppe had first spoken Sicilian to Sophia, where Vincent had first seen past her uniform to the woman underneath. But the dynamic was completely different now. Sophia wasn't serving anyone. She was being served, treated with the respect due to someone who mattered, someone who belonged to Vincent Torino's inner circle. Giuseppe ordered in the confident English that Sophia had taught him, his pronunciation careful but clear. "Pasta con sarde, please, like my Maria used to make, but with extra fennel because Sophia says it's good for the digestion." The young waitress taking their order looked barely older than Sophia had been when she worked here, all nervous energy and careful invisibility. Sophia watched her with recognition and compassion, remembering the weight of being unseen. "What's your name?" Sophia asked gently. Carmen, the girl said, surprised to be addressed directly by someone who clearly belonged to Vincent's dangerous world. That's a beautiful name. My mother's name is Carmen, too. Sophia's smile was warm, genuine, free of the condescension that often came with success. How long have you worked here? 3 months, Carmen said, relaxing slightly at Sophia's kindness. It's a good place to start. Marco takes care of his people. After Carmen left to place their order, Giuseppe reached across the table and squeezed Sophia's hand. You remember what it was like, he said in Sicilian, to be that young, that scared, that invisible. I remember everything, Sophia replied. That's why I can never forget where I came from. Vincent watched this exchange with the kind of quiet pride that came from seeing someone he loved remain fundamentally unchanged despite her transformed circumstances. Sophia had gained confidence, security, and power, but she hadn't lost her essential kindness. If anything, her new position had made her more generous, more aware of the struggles of people who served others. Halfway through their meal, a commotion near the kitchen caught their attention. A customer at table 6 was berating Carmen over some perceived slight, his voice loud enough to carry across the entire restaurant. The man was drunk, belligerent, and taking out his frustrations on someone who couldn't fight back. Sophia watched for exactly 30 seconds before standing up with fluid grace. Excuse me, she said to the drunk man, her voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that made smart people pay attention. Is there a problem here? The man looked up, taking in Sophia's expensive clothes and the dangerous men sitting at her table. His alcohol-clouded brain tried to process whether this elegantly dressed woman was someone he should worry about. Just trying to get decent service, he slurred. This girl doesn't know what she's doing. Sophia looked at Carmen, who was trembling with embarrassment and fear. Then she looked back at the drunk customer with eyes that had learned to see clearly in Vincent Torino's world. Carmen is doing her job perfectly. You, however, are disturbing other people's dinner with behaviour that would embarrass a child. Sophia's voice remained pleasant, conversational, but there was steel underneath that made the man's survival instincts finally kick in. I suggest you pay your cheque, leave a generous tip, and find somewhere else to finish your evening. The man looked past Sophia to where Vincent and his bodyguard were watching with the kind of attention that preceded violence. Whatever argument he might have made died in his throat as he recognised exactly how outmatched he was. He threw money on the table and left without another word. Sophia turned to Carmen with a gentle smile. Don't let people like that make you feel small. You matter, you deserve respect, and anyone who treats you otherwise isn't worth your worry. Carmen nodded, tears of gratitude in her eyes. Thank you. I was afraid I was going to get fired. You're not going to get fired for standing up for yourself, and if anyone tells you otherwise, you come find me. Sophia handed Carmen a business card with Vincent's office number. Sometimes we all need someone in our corner. When Sophia returned to the table, Giuseppe was beaming with pride. That's my granddaughter, he announced to anyone within hearing distance. She protects the people who need protecting. Vincent's expression was filled with something deeper than pride, something closer to awe. This was why he had fallen in love with Sophia, this combination of strength and compassion that allowed her to be fierce without being cruel, powerful without being destructive. You didn't have to do that, Vincent said quietly. Yes, I did. 6 months ago, that was me. Invisible, vulnerable, afraid to defend myself because I couldn't afford to lose the only job I had. Sophia's eyes found Carmen across the restaurant. Now I can be the person I needed back then. Giuseppe raised his wineglass in a toast. To Sophia, who teaches us that strength without kindness is just violence, and kindness without strength is just weakness. They drank to the sentiment, to the journey that had brought them together, to the family they had built from love and loyalty, and the shared understanding that some things were worth protecting. As they prepared to leave, Sophia stopped by the kitchen to say goodbye to the staff who remembered her. They looked at her with a mixture of pride and disbelief, seeing someone who had started where they were and found a way to something better. Remember, Sophia told them, invisible doesn't mean powerless. Sometimes the people no one sees are the ones who see everything. Outside Romano's, Vincent helped Giuseppe into the car while Sophia took a last look at the restaurant where her transformation had begun. The rain was falling again, just like it had that first night, but this time Sophia didn't hurry to get out of it. "Any regrets?" Vincent asked, joining her on the sidewalk. Sophia considered the question seriously, thinking about the life she had left behind and the life she had chosen. "Only one," she said finally. "I regret that it took so long to understand that being seen isn't something that happens to you. It's something you choose for yourself." Vincent kissed her then, there on the sidewalk where their story had begun, with the rain falling and Giuseppe watching from the car with grandfatherly approval. 6 months ago, Sophia Reyes had been invisible. Tonight, she was the most visible woman in the city, protected by love and empowered by the knowledge that she had found her place in a world that would never overlook her again. The waitress was gone. In her place stood a queen who had built her kingdom on the foundation of a simple truth: everyone deserved to be seen, valued, and protected. And sometimes, if you were very lucky and very brave, you found someone who would help you remember that you had always been worth saving. Sophia had finally learned to see herself the way Vincent and Giuseppe had seen her from the beginning. She was magnificent. The temperature in Romano's dining room seemed to drop 10 degrees the moment Vincent Torino walked through the door. Sophia felt it before she saw him, the subtle shift in atmosphere that happens when an apex predator enters a room full of prey. Conversations didn't stop exactly, but they became quieter, more careful. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Even the kitchen sound seemed muted, as if the building itself was holding its breath. She was refilling the coffee station when the front door chimed, and she glanced up to see 3 men in expensive suits scanning the restaurant with the practiced efficiency of bodyguards. They moved like water around obstacles, positioning themselves at strategic points near the windows and back exit. Professional, deadly, invisible to most customers, but terrifyingly obvious to anyone who knew what to look for. Then Vincent himself stepped inside, and Sophia understood why the air had changed. He was wearing a suit that cost more than the restaurant's annual revenue. Charcoal grey wool, tailored to a terrifying perfection that emphasized the predatory grace of his movements. His dark hair was swept back from a face that belonged in Renaissance paintings, all sharp angles and classical proportions. But it was his eyes that made Sophia's breath catch. Dark as obsidian and just as cutting, they missed absolutely nothing as they swept the dining room. Marco appeared from behind the bar like a nervous rabbit, his hands already wringing together. Sophia had never seen their normally confident manager look so diminished, so careful with his words. "Mr. Torino," Marco said, his voice pitched higher than usual. "We have your usual table ready, right this way." Vincent nodded once, a gesture that somehow managed to be both polite and dismissive. But he didn't move toward the table yet. Instead, his attention was focused on the elderly man beside him, and for the first time, Sophia saw something other than calculated control in Vincent's expression. Concern. Deep, bone-deep worry that he was trying very hard to hide. The old man was small and frail, probably in his late 70s, with silver hair that had once been as dark as his son's. His confusion was immediately apparent. He stood in the doorway, blinking at the restaurant like he wasn't sure where he was or how he'd gotten there. His hands shook slightly as he gripped a worn leather wallet, and he was speaking in rapid, agitated Italian. "Papa," Vincent said softly, his voice gentler than Sophia would have expected from a man whose reputation preceded him like a storm front. "Siamo qui per la cena. Remember, dinner." But the old man didn't seem to hear him. He continued speaking, his words tumbling over each other in increasing distress. Sophia caught fragments of what he was saying, and her heart clenched. He was asking for Maria, calling for his wife, looking around the restaurant like she might emerge from the kitchen at any moment. Vincent's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. This was clearly not the first time. Marco hovered nearby, unsure whether to approach or retreat. The other customers had started to notice the commotion, their curious glances adding another layer of pressure to an already tense situation. Sophia could see Vincent's bodyguards growing more alert, their hands moving closer to concealed weapons as their boss's father became increasingly agitated. "Papa, please," Vincent tried again, switching to Italian. But his pronunciation was stilted, formal. He spoke like someone who had learned the language from tutors rather than at his mother's knee. The words were correct, but lacked the melody, the emotional resonance that the old man needed. Giuseppe Torino pushed away the hostess, who tried to guide him to the table. He was speaking faster now, his voice rising with panic. Sophia didn't need a translation to understand his distress. She had heard this exact tone before, in her grandmother's voice during the bad days when Nonna couldn't remember where she was or why her daughter never visited any more. The bodyguards tensed. Marco wrung his hands. Vincent's control was slipping, and everyone in the restaurant could feel the dangerous electricity building in the air. Giuseppe knocked over a water glass at the nearest table, the sound of shattering crystal cutting through the murmured conversations like a gunshot. An elderly woman at table 4 gasped. A businessman near the window reached for his phone, probably thinking about calling for help or posting about the drama on social media. Vincent's eyes flashed, and Sophia saw something lethal move behind his careful facade. This was a man who solved problems with violence, who had built an empire on the bones of people who had crossed him. But the problem was his father, and violence wasn't an option. For the first time in his adult life, Vincent Torino was powerless. Giuseppe was crying now, tears of frustration and fear streaming down his weathered cheeks as he called for a wife who had been dead for 3 years. He pushed away every attempt to calm him, his confusion feeding on itself until he was nearly hyperventilating. That was when Sophia made a decision that would change everything. She had been watching from behind the coffee station, her hands gripping the counter until her knuckles went white. Every instinct screamed at her to stay invisible, to let this play out without getting involved. These weren't her people. This wasn't her problem. One word to the wrong person could cost her the only job she had left. But she couldn't watch anymore. She couldn't stand there while an old man suffered, while his son struggled helplessly to comfort him in a language that had been stolen by distance and time. Sophia set down her coffee pot with steady hands and walked across the dining room. The bodyguards noticed her first. She felt their attention lock onto her like targeting lasers, calculating threat level and response time. One of them shifted slightly, ready to intercede if necessary. But Sophia kept walking, her movements slow and non-threatening. Vincent saw her coming, and his eyes narrowed. He didn't speak, but his posture shifted into something more dangerous. A warning. A clear message that whatever she was planning, she should reconsider. Sophia ignored him. She had eyes only for Giuseppe, who was now gripping the edge of a table and speaking in broken sentences about needing to get home, about Maria waiting for him, about being lost in a place that smelled wrong. She knelt beside his chair, moving slowly enough not to startle him. When she was at eye level, she reached out carefully and touched his trembling hand. "Nonno Giuseppe," she said softly, the Sicilian flowing off her tongue like water. "Sono qui, non è perduto." "Grandfather Giuseppe, I'm here. You're not lost." The effect was immediate and stunning. Giuseppe stopped crying. His frantic breathing slowed. He turned to look at Sophia with eyes that were suddenly brilliantly clear. "Maria," he whispered in Sicilian, "is that you, my love?" Sophia smiled, the expression transforming her entire face. "No, nonnu, I'm Sophia, but Maria sent me to take care of you. She said to tell you that she loves you and that you should eat something. You know how she worries when you don't eat." Giuseppe's face crumpled with relief. His fingers closed around Sophia's hand with surprising strength, holding on like she was the only solid thing in a world that had been spinning out of control. The dining room had gone completely silent. Every conversation, every clink of silverware, every whisper had stopped. Even the kitchen sounds had ceased. It was as if the entire restaurant was holding its breath, watching this impossible moment unfold. Vincent stood frozen, his expression unreadable. His bodyguards remained tense but confused, unsure whether this development was a threat or a miracle. Marco looked like he was about to faint. But Sophia only had attention for Giuseppe, who was now smiling through his tears and speaking to her in the rapid, musical Sicilian of his childhood. Telling her about the village where he was born, about the lemon trees and the smell of the sea, about the girl named Maria, who used to bring him fresh bread from her father's bakery. Sophia listened with patience and genuine interest, responding in the same dialect, her voice carrying the warmth and respect that Giuseppe needed. She understood not just his words, but his heart, the deep loneliness of a man who had outlived his world and found himself stranded in a place where no one spoke the language of his soul. And watching from 3 feet away, Vincent Torino began to see Sophia Reyes for the first time. Giuseppe's agitation returned like a tide rolling back to shore, starting as a subtle tremor in his hands and building into something more desperate. Sophia had managed to calm him temporarily, but the confusion was stronger than her gentle words. He pushed away from the table, his chair scraping against the floor with a sound like fingernails on glass. "Casa?" he said, his voice rising with panic. "Devo andare a casa, Maria mi aspetta." "Home. I have to go home. Maria is waiting for me." Sophia's heart broke a little more with each word. She had heard this exact plea countless times during her grandmother's final months, when Nonna Benedetta would wake up calling for her own long-dead mother, convinced she was late for some appointment that existed only in the tangled pathways of her failing memory. Giuseppe stood up unsteadily, nearly knocking over his water glass. His eyes darted around the restaurant like a trapped animal looking for an escape route. The other customers had stopped pretending not to stare. A woman at table 7 pulled out her phone, probably recording what she thought was just an interesting scene of family drama. Vincent moved closer to his father, his face a careful mask of patience. But Sophia could see the tension in his jaw, the way his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. This was a man accustomed to controlling every situation through force or fear, and watching his father spiral into confusion was slowly destroying him. "Papa, sit down," Vincent said in stilted Italian. "The food will be here soon." But Giuseppe wasn't listening. He was searching the faces of everyone in the restaurant, looking for someone who wasn't there. "Maria!" he called out, his voice cracking with desperation. "Where is my Maria? She said she would meet me here." The bodyguards shifted nervously. Marco looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Sophia watched Vincent's careful control beginning to crack, and she realized with sudden clarity exactly what was happening. Giuseppe wasn't just confused about where he was. He was lost in time, trapped in a memory of a dinner date with his wife from decades ago. He genuinely believed Maria would walk through that door any moment, and every second that passed without her appearance was another small betrayal by a world that no longer made sense. Sophia had seen this before, the way Nonna would dress up for visits from relatives who had been dead for 20 years, the way she would set 2 places at the table and wait for her husband to come home from a war that had ended before Sophia was born, the cruel mathematics of dementia, where love became arithmetic and memory became geography, and every familiar landmark disappeared one by one until you were standing in your own life like a stranger. Giuseppe pushed past Vincent, heading for the door with surprising speed for a man his age. "I have to find her," he said, switching between Italian and Sicilian so rapidly that even Sophia had to concentrate to follow. "She doesn't know where I am. She'll be worried." Vincent caught his father's arm gently but firmly. "Papa, please, Maria isn't coming tonight." "Of course she is," Giuseppe's voice rose to almost a shout. "We have dinner every Tuesday. She wears the blue dress with the little flowers. She always orders the chicken parmigiana." The pain in Vincent's eyes was raw and unguarded for just a moment before the mask slammed back into place. Sophia realized she was witnessing something intensely private, a glimpse into the man behind the reputation. Vincent Torino, who could make grown men disappear with a phone call, was helpless against the enemy that was stealing his father's mind one memory at a time. Giuseppe was crying again, the tears of an old man who had outlived his own understanding of the world. He kept calling for Maria, his voice breaking on her name like a prayer that God had stopped answering. Sophia looked at Vincent's stricken face, at Giuseppe's confusion, at the room full of strangers watching this private agony unfold like entertainment. She thought about her job, about the rent that was due tomorrow, about Marco's corporate masters who were already looking for reasons to cut costs. She thought about her mother's medication and the bills that wouldn't pay themselves. Then she thought about Nonna Benedetta, alone and frightened in a nursing home, calling for people who existed only in the fading photographs of her mind. She wasn't brave. She was just tired of watching people suffer. Sophia stood up slowly, her movements deliberate and calm despite the chaos around Giuseppe. Vincent's bodyguards tensed as she approached, their hands moving instinctively toward concealed weapons. One of them stepped forward, ready to intercept her if she posed any threat to their principal's family. Vincent himself turned toward her, his expression dark with warning. "Miss, this isn't your concern." Sophia met his eyes without flinching. "With respect, Mr. Torino, I think it is." The danger in Vincent's gaze could have frozen water. This was a man who had built his empire on the bones of people who had overstepped their boundaries, who had mistaken his momentary vulnerability for weakness. Sophia could practically feel the air crackle with potential violence, but Giuseppe was still crying, still calling for his dead wife, still lost in a maze of memories that led nowhere. And Sophia had spent too many nights holding her grandmother's hand while dementia slowly devoured everything that made her who she was. She ignored Vincent's glare and focused on Giuseppe, who was now pressing his palms against his temples like he could physically hold his scattered thoughts together. She knelt beside his chair again, moving slowly enough not to startle him or trigger any protective instincts from the bodyguards. "Nonno Giuseppe," she said softly in Sicilian, her voice carrying all the warmth and patience she had learned from caring for Nonna. "Look at me." Giuseppe's eyes found hers, and for a moment the confusion cleared. "Who are you, child?" "I'm Sophia, and I need to tell you something important about Maria." Vincent stepped closer, his expression shifting from anger to sharp attention. The entire restaurant seemed to lean in, sensing that something significant was about to happen. Sophia took Giuseppe's hands in hers, her touch gentle but grounding. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone who understood the landscape of loss. "Maria had to go ahead of you tonight, Nonno. She's waiting for you at home. But first, she wants you to have dinner with your son. She told me to make sure you eat something because she knows how you forget when you're worried about her." Giuseppe's face cycled through confusion, hope, and then a strange, profound relief. "She sent you?" "Yes," Sophia said simply. "She said to tell you that she's proud of how well Vincent takes care of you. And she said to remind you about the chicken parmigiana. She knows it's your favourite." For the first time since walking into the restaurant, Giuseppe smiled. A real smile that transformed his entire face and made it possible to see the young man he had once been, the one who had fallen in love with a girl in a blue dress 60 years ago. "Maria always thinks of everything," he said, settling back into his chair with visible relief. "She's a good wife." Sophia squeezed his hands gently. "The best. Now will you let Vincent order for you? Maria specifically said you should trust him tonight." Giuseppe looked at his son with clear eyes for the first time all evening. "Vincent is a good boy. He takes care of his papa." Vincent stood frozen, staring at Sophia like she had just performed a miracle, which in a way she had. She had given his father a moment of peace in a world that no longer made sense, had built a bridge across the gap between confusion and clarity, using nothing but empathy and a few carefully chosen words. The silence in the restaurant was profound, broken only by the soft sound of Giuseppe humming a Sicilian lullaby under his breath. Everyone was staring at Sophia, but she only had eyes for the old man whose hand still rested trustingly in hers. She had just stepped out of the shadows and into Vincent Torino's world, and there would be no going back. Giuseppe responded to Sophia's gentle guidance like a flower turning towards sunlight. The panic that had gripped him moments before melted away as he settled back into his chair, his breathing steady and calm. But it was what happened next that would haunt Vincent Torino for weeks to come. Giuseppe began to talk, not the confused fragments and desperate pleas of moments before, but the rich, flowing Sicilian of his childhood. He spoke to Sophia like she was his own granddaughter, sharing stories that Vincent had never heard, using phrases and expressions that carried the weight of generations. "You know, Piccola," Giuseppe said, his weathered hands gesturing as he spoke. "Maria and I met during the festa of San Giuseppe in Palermo. She was wearing a dress the colour of morning sky, and when she smiled—" He paused, his eyes growing distant with memory. When she smiled, the whole world stopped. Sophia leaned in, hanging on every word. "Tell me more about the festa, Nonnu. What was it like?" "Ah, child, it was magic. The whole village came together. Tables stretched down every street, loaded with bread shaped like crosses and fishes. The smell of frittelle filled the air, and the children ran between the tables like little angels." Giuseppe's voice carried the musical cadence of his homeland, each word perfectly pronounced in the dialect of his youth. Vincent stood transfixed. His father was speaking with more clarity and animation than he had shown in months, but Vincent could only catch fragments of the conversation. His formal Italian education hadn't prepared him for the ancient rhythms of Sicilian dialect, the way consonants softened and vowels sang with emotion. Sophia responded in the same musical dialect, her pronunciation so authentic that she could have been born in the same village as Giuseppe. "And the music? My nonna used to tell me about the musicians who played at the festivals." "Mandolins and guitars," Giuseppe said, his face lighting up with joy. "And my cousin Salvatore, with his accordion that sounded like angels weeping. We danced until the sun came up, and Maria's father had to drag her home because she didn't want the night to end." Vincent felt like an outsider listening to a foreign language, which in many ways he was. This was the heritage that had been sanitized out of his upbringing, the cultural identity traded for American respectability and business success. His father had spoken English in the house, insisted that Vincent learn to fit into the new world rather than cling to the old one. Now, watching Giuseppe come alive in conversation with a stranger, Vincent realized what had been lost in that translation. Sophia asked questions with the intuition of someone who understood not just the language, but the culture behind it. "Did you and Maria have children right away, or did you wait?" "We waited 3 years," Giuseppe said, his voice dropping to the intimate tone reserved for family secrets. "Maria lost 2 babies before Vincent was born. We prayed to every saint in heaven, lit so many candles that the church looked like a constellation." His eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of remembrance rather than confusion. When Vincent finally came, healthy and strong, Maria said he was our miracle, our benedizione. Vincent's throat tightened. He had never known about the lost children, never understood why his parents had been so protective, so grateful for his presence in their lives. The knowledge hit him like a physical blow, making him acutely aware of how much of his own history he didn't know. Sophia reached across the table and squeezed Giuseppe's hand. "Vincent is still your benedizione. Look how well he takes care of you." Giuseppe glanced at his son with clear, loving eyes. "He is a good man, my Vincent, strong like his mother wanted, but sometimes—" He switched back to Sicilian, speaking directly to Sophia in words that Vincent couldn't follow, but somehow understood were about him. Sophia nodded, her expression thoughtful. She responded in the same dialect, and whatever she said made Giuseppe's face break into a wide smile. "What did she tell you?" Vincent asked, unable to contain his curiosity any longer. Giuseppe turned to his son with newfound clarity. "She says you have Maria's eyes, kind eyes, but worried all the time. She says you need someone to cook for you to make sure you remember to eat." Sophia blushed, but she didn't look away from Vincent's intense stare. "Your father was just concerned that you work too much. That's what grandparents do. They worry." "And what did you tell him?" Vincent's voice was carefully controlled, but Sophia could hear the underlying tension. "I told him that strong men need strong food and people who care about them. I suggested he order something that would remind him of home, something Maria used to make." Giuseppe clapped his hands together with delight. "Pasta con sarde, just like Maria made it, with the wild fennel and pine nuts. Can they make it here?" Sophia looked toward the kitchen, then back at Giuseppe. "I don't know if they have all the ingredients, but I could ask, or—" She hesitated, glancing at Vincent. "If you want, I could make it for you sometime. My nonna taught me the traditional way." The offer hung in the air like a challenge. Vincent stared at Sophia with new eyes, seeing past the stained uniform and tired expression to something he hadn't noticed before. Intelligence, competence, a depth of cultural knowledge that she had kept hidden behind her carefully cultivated invisibility. Giuseppe was already nodding enthusiastically. "Vincent, this girl understands. She knows the old ways. You should bring her to the house sometime." The casual suggestion sent ripples of shock through the entire table. Vincent's bodyguards exchanged glances. Marco, who had been hovering nearby trying to look busy, nearly dropped his tray. The idea of Vincent Torino bringing a waitress to his private residence was so far outside the realm of possibility that it might as well have been a suggestion to fly to the moon. But Giuseppe continued talking, oblivious to the seismic shift his words had created. "Maria would have liked you," he told Sophia with absolute certainty. "She always said you could tell the good ones by how they treat the old people. And you—" He patted her hand with grandfatherly affection. "You have a good heart." Sophia felt the weight of every stare in the restaurant. Vincent's bodyguards were watching her with new interest, trying to calculate whether this development represented an opportunity or a threat. Marco looked like he was considering whether he should start looking for a new job immediately. The other customers had given up any pretense of eating and were openly eavesdropping on every word. But it was Vincent's expression that held her attention. He was studying her face like he was seeing it for the first time, and maybe he was. The invisible waitress had just demonstrated knowledge and cultural fluency that would be valuable in his world, had connected with his father in a way that Vincent himself couldn't manage. "Where did you learn to speak like that?" Vincent asked, his voice quiet but intense. "My grandmother," Sophia said simply. "She came from Messina when she was 16. She never lost the old ways, never stopped speaking Sicilian at home. She said it was important to remember where we came from." "And where is your grandmother now?" Sophia's expression flickered with pain. "She died last year, dementia. But before that, she made sure I understood. The language, the traditions, the stories, she said they were my inheritance." Giuseppe squeezed Sophia's hand. "A wise woman. The young ones today, they forget too easily. They think the old ways don't matter anymore." Vincent was quiet for a long moment, processing what he had just witnessed. His father, who had been slipping away piece by piece for months, was suddenly present and engaged. Not just present, but joyful, sharing stories and memories with someone who understood their significance. All because of a waitress who spoke the language of his father's heart. "What else did your grandmother teach you?" Vincent asked. Sophia met his gaze steadily. "Everything she could. Cooking, cleaning, taking care of family. She said the most important job a woman could have was making sure the people she loved felt safe and fed and remembered." The words hung between them, loaded with implications that neither was quite ready to acknowledge. But in that moment, Watching his father smile with genuine happiness for the first time in months, Vincent Torino began to see Sophia Reyes not as an invisible servant, but as something infinitely more dangerous. A possibility. Vincent's first direct question to Sophia carried the weight of an interrogation, though his voice remained carefully neutral. "Where did you learn to speak like that?" Sophia felt the attention of everyone in the restaurant focused on her like a spotlight. Vincent's bodyguards had shifted their positions almost imperceptibly, creating a loose perimeter around the table. Marco was pretending to inventory wine bottles, but she could see him straining to hear every word. Even the customers at nearby tables had abandoned their meals to listen to this unexpected drama. "My grandmother," Sophia said, keeping her voice steady despite the nervous flutter in her chest. "She came from Messina when she was 16. She never stopped speaking Sicilian, even after 60 years in America." Vincent leaned back in his chair, his dark eyes never leaving her face. "Messina, that's where my mother's family was from." The coincidence hung in the air between them like a bridge neither had expected to find. Giuseppe looked up from his menu, suddenly alert to a conversation that had shifted into deeper waters. "Your nonna?" Giuseppe said to Sophia. "What was her family name?" "Benedetta Calabresi," Sophia replied. "She married my grandfather when she was 19, but he died young. Car accident. She raised my mother alone." Giuseppe's eyes widened. "Calabresi from Messina. There was a family. My cousin married a Calabresi girl from the old neighbourhood. Dark hair, sang like an angel in the church choir." Sophia's breath caught. That could be her. Nonna always talked about singing, about how music was the language God understood best. Vincent watched this exchange with growing fascination. The invisible waitress was revealing layers of identity and connection that he hadn't imagined existed. More importantly, she was speaking about her grandmother with a reverence and knowledge that suggested deep cultural roots rather than casual familiarity. "Tell me about your education," Vincent said, his tone shifting into something more pointed. "Besides what your grandmother taught you." Sophia hesitated. She could feel the weight of his attention, the sense that her answer would determine something important. "Community college. I was studying business administration before—" She gestured vaguely, not wanting to detail the financial catastrophe that had derailed her plans. "Before what?" "Before Nonna got sick. The medical bills, the care she needed. I had to drop out to work full-time." Vincent's phone buzzed against the table. He glanced at the screen, and Sophia caught a glimpse of text that made his expression harden slightly. Someone named Castellano was demanding a meeting, someone who clearly wasn't asking politely. "Excuse me," Vincent said, answering the call with clipped efficiency. "This is Torino." Sophia couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but she watched Vincent's face grow progressively more dangerous as he listened. His free hand curled into a fist on the white tablecloth, and when he spoke, his voice carried the kind of quiet menace that made smart people very afraid. "Tell him I'll consider his proposal when hell freezes over, and Marco?" Vincent's eyes found one of his bodyguards across the room. "Make sure our friends understand that family dinner is not the time for business interruptions." He ended the call with more force than necessary, then immediately softened his expression as he turned back to Giuseppe and Sophia. The transition was seamless and terrifying, a glimpse of the man who could order death over dessert without losing his appetite. Giuseppe seemed oblivious to the undercurrent of violence that had just passed through their conversation. He was focused entirely on Sophia, asking her questions about her grandmother's cooking, her knowledge of Sicilian traditions, her understanding of the festivals and customs that had shaped his own childhood. Sophia answered each question with the kind of detailed knowledge that only came from genuine cultural immersion. She knew about the feast of Santa Rosalia, about the proper way to cure olives, about why you never served fish and cheese together. She understood the social hierarchies of village life, the importance of family honour, the unspoken rules that governed everything from courtship to business. Vincent found himself listening not just to her words, but to the music of her speech. When Sophia spoke Sicilian, her entire demeanour changed. She became more animated, more confident, as if the language unlocked some essential part of herself that English kept carefully hidden. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from his head of security. Background check complete. Sofia Elena Reyes, 24, born in Chicago. Mother Carmen Reyes, father unknown. Grandmother Benedetta Calabresi died 11 months ago after extended illness. No criminal record, no financial red flags. Foster care from age 7 to 18. Works 2 jobs, clean. Vincent read the information while half listening to Giuseppe tell Sophia about the lemon groves of his childhood. Clean. That was intelligent speak for someone who had no dangerous associations, no hidden agendas, no red flags that would make her a security risk. But it also meant she was exactly what she appeared to be, a hard-working young woman trying to survive in a world that offered her very few advantages. "Sophia," Vincent said, interrupting his father's story about harvest festivals, "Giuseppe seems very comfortable with you. That's unusual for him lately." Sophia looked between father and son, sensing the deeper currents in Vincent's observation. Dementia is isolating. When someone speaks your heart language, it feels like coming home. "And you understand this because of your grandmother?" "Yes, the last year of her life, English became harder for her. She would get frustrated trying to find words that had slipped away, but Sicilian never left her. When we spoke Sicilian, she was herself again." Vincent's phone buzzed a 3rd time. His expression darkened as he read the new message. "I have to step outside for a moment," he said, standing with fluid grace. "Business that can't wait." Giuseppe looked up with sudden anxiety. "Vincent, everything okay?" "Everything's fine, Papa. Sophia will keep you company." It was phrased as a statement, but Sophia heard the question underneath. Vincent Torino was asking her to stay with his father, to take care of the most precious thing in his world while he handled whatever crisis was demanding his attention. It was a test of trust so profound that Sophia felt the weight of it settle on her shoulders like a mantle. "Of course," she said simply. Vincent studied her face for a long moment, as if trying to read her intentions in the set of her mouth, the steadiness of her gaze. Then he nodded once and walked toward the restaurant's back exit, 2 bodyguards falling into step behind him. Sophia was alone with Giuseppe Torino, the elderly father of one of the most dangerous men in the city. And somehow, instead of feeling afraid, she felt honoured. Giuseppe reached across the table and patted her hand. "Vincent is a good boy, but he worries too much, always working, always fighting someone's war. His mother used to say he needed a woman who could make him remember there was more to life than business." Sophia felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Mr. Torino, I don't think—" "You call me Nonno Giuseppe," the old man said firmly. "We're familiar now. I can feel it." The word hung between them, loaded with implications that Sophia wasn't sure she was ready to understand. Familiar. Family. In Giuseppe's world it wasn't just a word, it was a sacred bond, a promise of protection and loyalty that transcended everything else. Outside she could hear Vincent's voice through the rain-streaked windows, speaking rapid Italian into his phone. His tone was hard, uncompromising, carrying the authority of a man who was accustomed to getting his way through whatever means necessary. Sophia looked at Giuseppe, who was humming a Sicilian lullaby under his breath, and realised that she had just stepped across a line that couldn't be uncrossed. She was no longer just a waitress who happened to speak the old language. She was someone Vincent Torino trusted with his father's care. In his world, that made her either invaluable or extremely dangerous. Sometimes Sophia was beginning to understand the difference between those 2 things was smaller than most people imagined. Vincent's phone revealed layers of Sophia's life that painted a picture he hadn't expected. The background check was thorough, compiled by professionals who could find digital fingerprints that most people didn't even know they left behind. But the numbers told a story that the invisible waitress had never spoken aloud. Foster care from age 7. No family records before that date. Mother hospitalised 3 times in the past year for heart complications, medical debt approaching 6 figures. 2 jobs, night classes until last year, perfect attendance record at both the community college and every employment position since turning 18. Vincent scrolled through the financial records while watching Sophia help Giuseppe navigate the menu. She had put herself through school on scholarship and determination, working 30 hours a week while maintaining a 3.8 GPA in business administration. Then her grandmother's illness had hit like a financial hurricane, and everything Sophia had built came crashing down. The girl had sacrificed her future to care for a dying woman who wasn't even technically family. Benedetta Calabresi had been her foster mother's mother, taking in Sophia when the state had nowhere else to place her. But Sophia had treated the elderly woman like blood, working herself to exhaustion to pay for treatments that only delayed the inevitable. "Vincent," Giuseppe said, pulling his attention back to the table, "Sophia says her nonna used to make sciuscedu for Christmas morning, just like your mother did." Vincent looked up from his phone to find Sophia blushing under his scrutiny. "Your grandmother made traditional Christmas soup?" "Every year," Sophia said, "chicken broth with tiny meatballs and ricotta dumplings. She said Christmas morning wasn't Christmas without it." Giuseppe clapped his hands together with delight. "Maria made the same thing. She said her mother taught her, and her mother's mother before that. It goes back generations." But Vincent was reading between the lines of Sophia's financial records, seeing the gaps where choice had been stripped away by circumstance. The girl had been paying for her grandmother's care out of pocket because Benedetta's immigration status had left her in Medicare limbo. Sophia had liquidated her college fund, maxed out credit cards, and worked herself down to £98 before Benedetta finally passed. "How did you manage the medical bills?" Vincent asked quietly. Sophia's hands stilled on her napkin. The question was too specific, too pointed to be casual conversation. She looked at Vincent with new wariness, understanding that this wasn't just polite interest in her background. "I did what I had to do," she said carefully. "That's not an answer." Giuseppe sensed the tension building and reached across to squeeze Sophia's hand. "Vincent, why do you interrogate the poor girl? She's been nothing but kind to us." But Vincent's attention was fixed on Sophia with laser intensity. He had recognized something in her file that most people would have missed. The timing was too precise, the financial collapse too sudden. Sophia hadn't just been unlucky. She had made a choice. "You had a scholarship," Vincent said. "Full ride to Northwestern for your junior year. Business administration with a focus on international economics. You turned it down." Sophia's face went very still. "How do you know that?" "I know a lot of things. What I don't know is why someone with your intelligence and opportunities chose to work at a diner instead of finishing her degree." The answer was there in the financial records, but Vincent wanted to hear it from her, wanted to understand the person behind the numbers, the character that would drive someone to sacrifice everything for a woman who had already lived her life. "Nonna didn't have anyone else," Sophia said finally. "The dementia was getting worse, and she needed round-the-clock care. I couldn't put her in a state facility. Have you seen those places?" Vincent had seen them. Warehouses for the forgotten elderly, where people went to die slowly and alone. He had made sure his father would never end up in such a place, had spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to ensure Giuseppe's comfort and dignity. But Vincent had money. Sophia had had nothing but determination and love. "So you gave up your future," Vincent said. "I gave up a piece of paper. Nonna gave me everything that mattered." Giuseppe was watching this exchange with growing understanding. His son was probing, testing, evaluating Sophia like she was a business investment rather than a young woman who had shown kindness to a confused old man. But Giuseppe could see something in Vincent's intensity that his son probably didn't recognize himself. Interest. Real, personal interest in a woman for the first time in years. Vincent's phone buzzed again, this time with a message that made his expression harden dangerously. The Castellanos were moving faster than anticipated, making inquiries about Giuseppe's daily routines, his medical appointments, the restaurant where he liked to eat dinner. They were hunting. "Sophia," Vincent said, his voice taking on a different quality, "my father seems very comfortable with you. That's not something that happens often anymore." Sophia looked at Giuseppe, who was smiling at her with grandfatherly affection. "He reminds me of Nonna. The confusion, the fear of being lost in your own mind. When someone understands the language of your heart, it's like finding home." Vincent was quiet for a long moment, processing not just her words, but the implications behind them. Sophia wasn't just speaking Sicilian to his father. She was providing something Vincent couldn't give, the deep cultural understanding that came from living the traditions rather than simply learning about them. Giuseppe had been slipping away for months, becoming more confused and agitated as his memory deteriorated. But sitting here with Sophia, he was present in a way that Vincent hadn't seen since before his mother's death. The old man was laughing, sharing stories, eating his food without prompting. Sophia was giving Giuseppe back pieces of himself that Vincent had thought were lost forever. "My father's care is complicated," Vincent said carefully. "He requires someone with specific knowledge, specific patience, someone who understands not just his medical needs, but his cultural ones." Sophia met his gaze steadily. "Are you offering me a job, Mr. Torino?" The directness of her question surprised him. Most people in her position would have danced around the implications, tried to read between the lines without committing to anything. But Sophia had looked straight at the heart of what he was considering and forced him to acknowledge it. "I'm exploring possibilities," Vincent said. Giuseppe looked between them with sharp eyes that were suddenly very clear. "Vincent, you need someone who understands familiar, someone who knows that taking care of the old people is an honour, not a burden." "Papa?" "She has good hands," Giuseppe continued, ignoring his son's warning tone. "Look how gentle she is, how patient. Maria would have liked her." The comparison to his dead mother hit Vincent like a physical blow. Giuseppe rarely mentioned Maria anymore, and when he did, it was usually with confusion about where she was or why she hadn't come home yet. To hear his father speak of Maria in the past tense with clarity and acceptance was both heartbreaking and remarkable, and it was happening because of Sophia. Vincent's phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID and felt his jaw clench. "I have to take this," he said, standing. "Sophia, would you mind staying with Giuseppe for a few minutes?" It was phrased as a request, but Sophia heard the weight behind it. Vincent Torino was asking her to care for the most important person in his world while he dealt with whatever crisis was demanding his attention. It was a test of trust so profound that Sophia felt the responsibility settle on her shoulders like a mantle. "Of course," she said. Vincent studied her face for a moment, as if trying to read her intentions in the steadiness of her gaze. Then he nodded and walked toward the restaurant's back exit, speaking in rapid, harsh Italian to whoever was on the other end of the line. Giuseppe watched his son leave, then turned to Sophia with eyes that were bright with intelligence. "He likes you," the old man said in Sicilian. "I can tell. Vincent is careful with his trust, but he's leaving you with me." Sophia felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Nonno Giuseppe, I don't think—" "You think I'm too old to recognize when a man is interested in a woman?" Giuseppe chuckled. "I may forget where I am sometimes, but I remember everything about love. And my son, he looks at you like he's seeing something he didn't know he was searching for." Outside, Vincent's voice rose in anger, his words carrying through the rain-soaked windows. Whatever conversation he was having, it wasn't going well. Sophia looked at Giuseppe, this elderly man who had somehow decided she belonged in his family, and realized that she was standing at a crossroads that would determine the rest of her life. Vincent Torino wasn't just considering hiring her as a caregiver, he was evaluating whether she could be trusted with something infinitely more precious. In a world where trust was the rarest currency, Sophia was being offered a chance to become wealthy beyond anything she had ever imagined. The question was whether she was brave enough to accept the price that wealth would demand. Vincent's phone call was the kind that required immediate attention and absolute privacy. He stepped into the restaurant's back office, his voice dropping to the dangerous quiet that his associates had learned to fear more than shouting. "Castellano wants a sit-down," Marco Benedetti reported from the other end of the line. "Says it's about territory disputes in Little Italy, but Vincent, the intelligence we're getting suggests something else entirely." Vincent watched through the office window as Sophia helped Giuseppe navigate his menu, her movements patient and gentle. What kind of something else? They've been asking questions about Giuseppe, his routines, his medical appointments, where he likes to eat. This isn't about territory. This is about leverage. The words hit Vincent like ice water. In his world, family was both the greatest strength and the most exploitable weakness. His father's deteriorating condition had made him vulnerable in ways that Vincent was still learning to navigate. Giuseppe couldn't remember faces anymore, couldn't distinguish between friend and enemy, couldn't even recognize when he was in danger. How long have they been watching? At least 2 weeks, maybe longer. Vincent, if they make a move on Giuseppe. They won't. Vincent's voice carried the kind of finality that ended conversations and sometimes lives. "Double his security detail. I want eyes on him 24/7. "Already done. But Vincent, there's a problem. Giuseppe keeps refusing the bodyguards. He gets agitated when they try to accompany him places. Yesterday he locked himself in his room rather than go to his doctor's appointment with a security escort." Vincent closed his eyes and leaned against the office wall. This was the impossible equation of protecting someone whose mental state made protection feel like imprisonment. Giuseppe needed freedom to maintain his dignity, but that freedom made him a target for anyone who wanted to hurt Vincent. "There's something else," Marco continued. "The girl, Sophia Reyes. Castellano's people have been asking about her too." Vincent's blood went cold. "Since when?" "Since about an hour ago. They know she's been talking to Giuseppe, know she works here. Vincent, if they think she matters to you, she doesn't matter to me." The lie came out too quickly, too sharp. Vincent could hear the uncertainty in his own voice, and if he could hear it, so could Marco. "Right, so you're running a background check on someone who doesn't matter?" Vincent was quiet for a moment, watching Sophia through the window. She was reading something to Giuseppe from the dessert menu, probably translating it into Sicilian so he could understand his options. The old man was laughing at whatever she was saying, his face bright with a joy that Vincent hadn't seen in months. "She's helping my father," Vincent said finally. "She's also creating a vulnerability. If Castellano figures out that Giuseppe trusts her, responds to her, they'll use that. They'll hurt her to hurt him to hurt you." The brutal logic was undeniable. In Vincent's world, caring about someone was the same as painting a target on their back. His father was already vulnerable because of his condition. Adding Sophia to the equation doubled the risk. But watching Giuseppe smile, seeing him present and engaged for the first time in months, Vincent found himself reluctant to eliminate the source of his father's happiness. "I need to think," Vincent said. "Think fast. Castellano's expecting an answer about the meeting by tomorrow." Vincent ended the call and stood in the office doorway, watching Sophia help Giuseppe choose between tiramisu and gelato. She had a natural ease with elderly people that came from genuine affection rather than professional obligation. When Giuseppe got confused about whether he'd already ordered coffee, Sophia gently redirected his attention without making him feel foolish or lost. She was good with him, more than good. She was a miracle, and miracles, in Vincent's experience, always came with a price. He returned to the table to find Giuseppe explaining to Sophia the difference between Sicilian cannoli and the inferior versions served in most American restaurants. Sophia was listening with the kind of rapt attention that suggested genuine interest rather than polite patience. "The ricotta has to be fresh," Giuseppe was saying, "not the stuff they sell in plastic containers. Real ricotta made that morning with just a little sugar and a drop of vanilla. And the shells—" Have to be fried fresh, Sophia finished. Nonna always said that cannoli shells were like secrets. They lose their magic if you keep them too long. Giuseppe beamed at her. Exactly. Your Nonna understood. Most people today, they don't appreciate the difference between good food and convenient food. Vincent slid back into his seat, his expression carefully neutral despite the storm of calculations running through his mind. Giuseppe, we should probably head home soon. Your medication schedule can wait another hour, Giuseppe said firmly. I'm enjoying myself for the first time in months. Don't rush me. It was a rare display of independence from his father, and Vincent found himself caught between pride and concern. Giuseppe was asserting himself, showing flashes of his old personality, but that same independence made him harder to protect, more likely to resist the security measures that kept him safe. Sophia noticed Vincent's tension immediately. Is everything okay, if you need to leave? Everything's fine, Vincent said, though his phone was already buzzing with new messages. Sophia, can I ask you something? Of course. How did you handle your grandmother's care when she became difficult? Sophia's expression softened with understanding. You mean when she started refusing help, when she got angry about feeling helpless? Yes. I learned to make her feel useful. Instead of doing things for her, I asked her to do things for me. I'd ask her to teach me recipes while I cooked, to tell me stories while I cleaned, to help me solve problems that didn't really exist. It gave her purpose instead of just maintenance. Vincent was quiet for a moment, absorbing the wisdom in her approach. Giuseppe needed dignity more than security, purpose more than protection. And Sophia understood that in a way that Vincent's expensive security teams never would. That's very insightful, Vincent said. It's not insight, it's love. Sophia's answer was simple, direct, and somehow devastating. When you love someone, you find ways to honour who they are, not just keep them alive. Giuseppe reached across the table and squeezed Sophia's hand. Vincent, I like this girl. She understands what's important. Vincent's phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from his head of security. 2 Castellano soldiers spotted outside. Black sedan, New York plates. They're watching. Vincent's entire body went taut with predatory alertness. His eyes swept the restaurant's windows, identifying threats and escape routes with automatic precision. The Castellanos weren't just gathering intelligence anymore. They were making their presence known, turning surveillance into intimidation. Sophia, Vincent said quietly, I need to ask you for a favour. What kind of favour? My father trusts you. That's rare and it's valuable, but it also makes you... Vincent chose his words carefully. It makes you someone that my enemies might try to use against me. Sophia's face went very still. Are you saying I'm in danger? I'm saying that associating with my family comes with certain risks, risks that most people aren't prepared to handle. Giuseppe looked between them with suddenly sharp eyes. Vincent, what aren't you telling me? Vincent ignored his father's question, keeping his focus on Sophia. If you continue helping Giuseppe, I can offer you protection. A job with benefits that would solve your financial problems permanently, but it would mean entering my world completely. And my world, he trailed off, unwilling to finish the sentence. My world destroys everything beautiful that enters it. Sophia sat quietly for a moment, understanding passing through her expression like clouds across the sun. She had recognized the danger in Vincent's reputation from the beginning, but she hadn't understood how that danger might extend to her. What exactly are you offering? She asked. Live-in care for Giuseppe, 6-figure salary, full medical coverage for you and your mother, educational expenses if you want to finish your degree, complete security for your family. The offer hung in the air between them like a loaded weapon. Sophia could solve every financial problem she had ever faced, could give her mother the medical care she needed, could build the life she had always dreamed of having. All she had to do was step into the world of a man who solved problems with violence and called it business. Giuseppe was watching her with hopeful eyes, already attached to the idea of having Sophia in his life permanently. Vincent was studying her with the intensity of someone evaluating a business investment that might save or destroy everything he had built. Sophia thought about her mother's heart medication, about the eviction notice that would arrive if she missed another month's rent, about the student loans that followed her like shadows. She thought about Giuseppe's confusion and loneliness, about the way his face lit up when someone spoke the language of his childhood. She thought about Vincent's dangerous world and the price that protection always demanded from the people who needed it most. "I need time to think," Sophia said finally. Vincent nodded, understanding more than she probably realized. "Take all the time you need, but Sophia—" His voice dropped to something that might have been a warning or a promise. "Whatever you decide, I want you to understand that I don't make this offer lightly. If you accept, you become family. And in my world, family is sacred, protected, but also bound by certain expectations." Sophia met his gaze steadily. "What kind of expectations?" "Loyalty, discretion, trust that goes both ways." Vincent's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "Think carefully, Sophia. Some decisions can't be undone." Outside, the rain continued to fall, and the black sedan continued to wait. And Sophia Reyes sat at the crossroads between safety and transformation, knowing that whatever choice she made would determine not just her own future, but the fate of the old man who had already decided she belonged to his family. Vincent returned to the table with the kind of controlled tension that preceded explosions. His movements were fluid, predatory, but Sophia could see the danger coiled beneath his careful composure. Whatever conversation he'd just finished had shifted something fundamental in the evening's dynamic. "Papa," Vincent said, his voice carrying new urgency, "we should head home. It's getting late." Giuseppe looked up from his dessert with confusion. "But we haven't finished talking. Sophia was telling me about the festa celebrations her nonna used to describe. We can continue the conversation another time." "Vincent," Giuseppe's voice carried the authority of a father who had once commanded respect in his own right. "Sit down. You're making everyone nervous with your pacing." Vincent glanced around the restaurant with new eyes, cataloguing exits and potential threats. The black sedan Marco had mentioned was still outside, its occupants making no effort to be subtle. Two men in cheap suits, trying too hard to look casual while watching every person who entered or left Romano's. Sophia followed his gaze and felt ice settle in her stomach. "Mr. Torino, are those men watching us?" Vincent's expression went completely blank, which Sophia was beginning to understand was more dangerous than anger. "Sophia, I need you to listen very carefully. In approximately 10 minutes, I'm going to walk my father out of this restaurant. When we leave, those men outside are going to follow us." "Vincent," Giuseppe said, his voice suddenly sharp with the clarity that sometimes cut through his confusion. "What have you done?" "Nothing that concerns you, Papa. But it appears that my business associates have decided that our family dinner is an appropriate venue for delivering messages." Sophia watched the interplay between father and son, seeing layers of history and complicated love beneath Vincent's protective instincts. Giuseppe might be losing pieces of his memory, but he hadn't lost his ability to read his son's moods. "They want something from you," Giuseppe said. It wasn't a question. "They always want something. The question is whether they're stupid enough to think they can take it." Sophia's hands were trembling as she reached for her water glass. This wasn't the theoretical danger that came with Vincent's reputation. This was immediate, present, potentially lethal. She could feel the attention of the men outside, like weight pressing against the restaurant's windows. "Sophia," Vincent said quietly, "when we leave, you're going to stay here. You're going to finish your shift, take the bus home, and pretend this conversation never happened." "But Giuseppe—" "We'll be fine. I've been protecting my father for longer than you've been alive." Giuseppe reached across the table and gripped Sophia's hand with surprising strength. "No," the old man said firmly. "If Sophia wants to come with us, she comes. I'm tired of being shuffled around like luggage, Vincent. This girl treats me like a person." Vincent's jaw clenched so hard that Sophia could see the muscle jump beneath his skin. "Papa, you don't understand the situation." "I understand perfectly. You have enemies, and they think they can hurt you by hurting me. It's not the first time, and it won't be the last." Giuseppe's eyes were completely clear now, focused with the intensity of someone who had suddenly remembered who he used to be. "But I will not be a prisoner in my own life, and I will not abandon someone who has shown me kindness because you're afraid." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Sophia could see Vincent wrestling with competing impulses, his need to protect his father warring with his respect for Giuseppe's dignity. Vincent's phone buzzed. He glanced at the message and his expression went from dangerous to lethal. "What is it?" Sophia asked. "They're not just watching anymore." Vincent showed her the phone. The text was simple and devastating. "Nice dinner conversation. The girl speaks beautiful Sicilian. Would hate for something to happen to her." Sophia felt the blood drain from her face. The Castellano family wasn't just threatening Vincent through his father anymore. They were threatening her directly, making her a target simply because she had shown kindness to an old man. "They know who I am," Sophia whispered. "They know you matter to Giuseppe. In my world, that's enough." Giuseppe was looking between them with growing understanding. "They threatened Sophia because of me?" Vincent didn't answer, but his silence was confirmation enough. Giuseppe's face cycled through confusion, anger, and then a fierce protectiveness that reminded Sophia exactly whose son Vincent was. "Nobody threatens familia," Giuseppe said, his voice carrying the steel of a man who had once been feared in his own right. "Nobody." Sophia stared at the phone message, understanding that her life had just changed irrevocably. The Castellanos had made her a player in a game she didn't understand, with rules she had never learned. Whether she accepted Vincent's offer or not, she was already in danger. "What do they want from you?" Sophia asked. Vincent was quiet for a long moment, calculating how much truth she could handle. "Territory, respect, money, the usual things that men kill for when they run out of imagination. And Giuseppe is leverage. They can't touch me directly, so they go after what I care about most." Sophia looked at Giuseppe, who was watching her with grandfatherly concern, despite being the target of the threat himself. This sweet old man, who just wanted someone to speak Sicilian with him and remember his wife's cooking, had become a pawn in a war he hadn't chosen. "If I walk away now," Sophia said carefully, "will they leave me alone?" Vincent's expression was brutally honest. "I don't know. They've already shown they know where you work, where you live. The kind of men we're dealing with don't distinguish between innocent bystanders and legitimate targets." The restaurant felt smaller suddenly, the walls closing in as Sophia understood the scope of what was happening. She had walked into Vincent's world by accident, but there might not be a way to walk back out. "So my choices are what exactly?" "Accept my protection and the job I offered, or disappear, leave the city, change your name, hope they lose interest." Sophia thought about her mother, alone in their apartment with a heart condition and no insurance. Thought about the bills that kept coming regardless of whether Sophia had a job to pay them. Thought about starting over in some strange city with nothing but the clothes on her back and a target painted on her spine by men she had never met. "There's a third option," Giuseppe said quietly. Both Sophia and Vincent turned to look at him. "We fight back." Vincent leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Papa, you don't understand what you're saying." "I understand perfectly. These Castellano dogs think they can threaten my family, think they can scare a young woman who has done nothing but show kindness to an old fool." Giuseppe's eyes blazed with an intensity that made him look decades younger. "I may be losing my memory, but I haven't lost my spine." Sophia felt something shift inside her chest, a spark of defiance that she hadn't known she possessed. She thought about her grandmother, who had raised her with stories of women who fought for their families, who protected what mattered most, regardless of the cost. "If I say yes," Sophia said to Vincent, "if I accept your offer, what happens next?" "You move into the guest suite at my house tonight. You never work another shift at this restaurant. You become Giuseppe's companion and translator, and you let me handle the people who want to hurt you. And in return, you become family, with all the protection and obligations that entails." Sophia looked around the restaurant where she had been invisible for 8 months, where she had served people who never saw her face and customers who forgot her name before they reached the door. She thought about the life she'd been living, paycheck to paycheck, crisis to crisis, surviving rather than truly living. Then she thought about Giuseppe's smile when she spoke Sicilian, about Vincent's careful attention when he thought she wasn't looking, about the way it felt to be seen and valued for the first time in her adult life. "Mr. Torino," Sophia said, her voice steady despite the fear racing through her veins, "I accept your offer." Vincent studied her face for a long moment, searching for doubt or uncertainty. Finding none, he nodded once. "Then we leave together, all 3 of us, and Sophia—" Vincent's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "Welcome to the family. I hope you're ready for what that means." Outside, the Castellano soldiers started their engine, preparing to follow whatever move Vincent made next. But inside Romano's restaurant, Sophia Reyes had just stepped across the line that separated her old life from her new one, and there would be no going back. The invisible waitress was gone. In her place sat someone who mattered enough to threaten, to protect, to fight for. In Vincent Torino's world, that made her the most dangerous kind of weapon, someone with nothing left to lose and everything to gain. Vincent's formal offer came in the privacy of his armoured Mercedes, with Giuseppe dozing in the passenger seat and Sophia sitting behind bulletproof glass that cost more than most people's cars. The restaurant was 20 minutes behind them, but the black sedan had followed for exactly 6 blocks before Vincent's security team had encouraged it to find somewhere else to be. The encouragement had involved 3 additional vehicles, tactical coordination, and the kind of conversation that happened at gunpoint in dark alleys. Sophia didn't ask for details. Some questions were better left unasked in Vincent Torino's world. "The position I'm offering isn't just a job," Vincent said, his voice low enough not to wake his father. "It's a commitment. Giuseppe requires someone who understands both his medical needs and his cultural ones, someone who can provide continuity when his memory fails him." Sophia watched the city pass by through tinted windows that turned the familiar streets into something foreign and slightly sinister. What exactly would my responsibilities include? Daily care coordination, medication management, transportation to medical appointments, social engagement to keep his mind active. Vincent paused, choosing his words carefully. "And translation services when his English fails him or when he needs to speak with people from the old country." The salary he mentioned was more money than Sophia had ever imagined earning. 6 figures, with full medical coverage for both her and her mother, educational expenses if she wanted to complete her degree, housing provided, and a security detail that would ensure her safety. "It sounds too good to be true," Sophia said honestly. "It is too good to be true. That's because it's not charity, it's necessity." Vincent's eyes met hers in the rearview mirror. "Giuseppe needs you, Sophia, not just someone like you specifically. In 3 hours of conversation, you've given him more peace and clarity than he's had in months." Giuseppe stirred in his sleep, murmuring something in Sicilian about lemon trees and wedding bells. Sophia reached forward instinctively and placed her hand on his shoulder, a gesture of comfort that seemed to calm him immediately. Vincent watched this interaction with the intensity of someone observing a miracle. "There are conditions," Vincent continued. "You would live in my house for Giuseppe's continuity and your protection. You would be available around the clock when needed, though you'd have assistance and scheduled time off. And Sophia—" He paused, and Sophia saw something complicated pass through his expression. "Yes?" "You would become part of this family, with all the protection and obligations that entails. My enemies would consider you a legitimate target. My business associates would treat you with the respect due to someone under my personal protection. Your life would change completely. Sophia thought about her mother, struggling to pay for heart medication on a fixed income, about the eviction notice that would arrive if the rent wasn't paid tomorrow, about the student loans that followed her like predators, demanding payments she couldn't afford. What about my mother's medical care? Completely covered. The best specialists, private hospitals, whatever she needs. I'll have my personal physician evaluate her condition and coordinate her treatment. And if I want to finish my education? Any school, any program. I have relationships with several university administrations. Your academic career would be facilitated. The offer was everything Sophia had ever wanted, wrapped in a package she had never expected. Financial security, educational opportunities, meaningful work caring for someone she genuinely liked. The only price was stepping into a world where violence was a business tool and loyalty was the difference between life and death. "Can I ask you something personal?" Sophia said. Vincent's smile was sharp. "You can ask. I may not answer." "Why haven't you hired someone else for Giuseppe, someone with professional experience in elderly care?" Vincent was quiet for a long moment, his hands tightening on the steering wheel. When he spoke, his voice carried a rawness that Sophia hadn't heard before. "I've tried. Medical professionals who treated him like a case study rather than a person. Companions who patronized him or ignored him when he became confused. Giuseppe needs more than medical care, Sophia. He needs someone who sees him as a complete person, not just a collection of symptoms to be managed." Sophia understood. She had watched her grandmother be reduced to a diagnosis in the minds of medical professionals who meant well but couldn't see past the disease to the woman who still lived inside the failing memory. "Giuseppe deserves dignity," Sophia said. "Yes, and you're the first person I've met who understands what dignity looks like for someone in his condition." Giuseppe woke as they pulled into the circular driveway of Vincent's estate. The house was massive, all stone and glass and carefully manicured landscaping that probably cost more to maintain than most people earned in a year. But it was the security that caught Sophia's attention. Cameras, motion sensors, and guards who tried to look like gardeners but moved like soldiers. "We're home, Papa," Vincent said gently. Giuseppe looked around with confusion, not recognizing the familiar surroundings. "Where are we? This isn't my house." "This is your house now," Sophia said in Sicilian, her voice warm and patient. "Vincent built it for you, so you could have a garden and room for all your books." Giuseppe's confusion cleared as he focused on Sophia's voice. "Ah, yes, I remember now, the house with the lemon trees in the back garden. Vincent planted them because I told him about the ones we had in Palermo." Vincent shot Sophia a grateful look. The lemon trees had been his idea, an attempt to give his father something familiar to anchor his memories. But Giuseppe often forgot they existed, forgot why they were there, forgot that this palatial estate was supposed to be his home. "Would you like to show Sophia the garden?" Vincent asked his father. Giuseppe's face lit up with enthusiasm. "Yes, she needs to see the lemons. They're almost ready for harvest." As they walked through the house, Sophia tried not to stare at the obvious wealth surrounding her. Original artwork, handcrafted furniture, windows that offered views of manicured grounds that stretched beyond what she could see. But what struck her most was how the house felt like a museum rather than a home. Beautiful, expensive, and somehow empty of the warmth that made a place feel lived in. The garden, though, was different. Giuseppe led her through rows of carefully tended citrus trees, his hands gentle as he touched the developing fruit. Here he seemed more present, more connected to the world around him. "My father used to say that patience was the secret to growing lemons," Giuseppe told Sophia as they walked. "You plant the tree, you tend it, you wait, and if you're faithful in the small things, eventually you get something sweet." Sophia looked back at the house, where Vincent was watching them through the kitchen window. His expression was unguarded in a way she hadn't seen before, and she realized that he was seeing his father happy for the first time in months. "Nonno Giuseppe," Sophia said carefully, "what do you think about me staying here to help take care of you?" Giuseppe stopped walking and turned to face her with clear, intelligent eyes. "I think God sends people when we need them most, and I think my Vincent has been alone too long, carrying too much weight by himself. This is about helping you, not Vincent." "Child," Giuseppe said, with the wisdom of someone who had lived through love and loss and the complicated mathematics of family, "helping someone you love is never just about one person. Vincent needs to know I'm safe and happy so he can focus on his work without worrying. You need security and purpose so you can build the life you deserve. And he smiled with grandfatherly affection, "I need someone who speaks the language of my heart." Sophia looked around the garden, at the lemon trees and the carefully maintained roses, at the house that could become her home and the old man who had already decided she belonged to his family. "Yes," she said simply, "I'll stay." Giuseppe clapped his hands together with delight, then pulled her into a hug that smelled like aftershave and lemon blossoms. "Bene, now let's go tell Vincent that his family is complete." As they walked back toward the house, Sophia caught a glimpse of movement in the garden shadows. Security personnel, she realized, watching over Giuseppe even during their casual stroll. Vincent's protection was invisible but absolute, a reminder that safety in this world came at the price of constant vigilance. But watching Giuseppe's joy, seeing the relief in Vincent's expression as they approached the house, Sophia understood that she had just accepted more than a job. She had joined a family that was complicated, dangerous, and utterly devoted to protecting what mattered most. For the first time in her adult life, Sophia Reyes mattered to someone. And if that meant learning to live with bodyguards and bulletproof cars and the constant possibility of violence, then that was a price she was willing to pay. The invisible waitress was gone forever. In her place stood someone who belonged somewhere, who was needed, who had found her place in a world that most people would never understand. Sophia had finally come home.